welcome to another episode of A Cup of Joe. My name is Joe Escobedo, and today we're going to be talking about B2B social media marketing. And today I have a special guest on the show. We have Fenton. Thanks for being on the show, Philip.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me.
So Philip is the head of digital at RGE, which is a resource-based industrial group in Asia Pacific and globally. So because we're talking about B2B social media marketing, let's just dive right into it. Now, a question I get very often is, what's really the difference between B2B social media marketing and B2C? So what are your thoughts on that, Philip?
A lot of what we try to focus on with our content is really around storytelling. Thinking what are the pain points for our customers, and not just our customers, also I think sustainability is a great example. People, they may not buy our products directly, but this is a very popular, fashionable topic. There's a great deal of interest in this. So what are the kind of things that get people interested, get people talking? And for us, by and large, it's not pretty pictures. I think that's kind of true of most, or a lot of B2C companies as well. If you're in fashion, great. Good luck with your fantastic pictures on Instagram. But I think sometimes the differences between B2B and B2C are not as huge as people think. I think sometimes in B2B, we can easily forget that at the end of the day, we're talking to people. All business is about people. You need to keep that human element, and I think that's true whether it's B2B or B2C.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a lot of times, a lot of B2B marketers forget that they are, at the end of the day, speaking to different people, whether it's, organizations, they're still speaking to individuals on a larger basis. And I think you made a good point in terms of storytelling should be a part of B2C or B2B. Doesn't really matter what kind of sector you're in. But for me, one of the biggest differences, I think you touched on it, is kind of the duration or the viewpoint of B2C versus B2B. Now, a lot of B2C is very transactional. It's very kind of salesy a lot of the times. Whereas B2B, like you said, you're driving that longer term narrative and really including topics that are going to have influence over the longer term rather than kind of a one-off action. Mm-hmm. So yeah, great point there, Philip. Now, a lot of the times, a lot of B2B social media efforts are successful or not based on their strategy. So how do you go about creating an effective B2B social media strategy?
So for me, I think it's important to start with the audience. So first of all, you need to understand who your audience is, but then you need to figure out what are they interested in hearing. I think there's nothing worse than brands, or B2C, talking at you. So I think you need to understand what questions are your customers asking and how is what you're producing or providing the solution to that. And there's a lot of great tools that you can use. So I think part of it is intuition. I think there's definitely a place for that. Just what do you think about your business being interesting? But also there's a lot of tools. So there's Google Trends, there's Keyword Planner, all of these things that we can look and get some really hard data on. What are the things that people are searching for? What are the things that people are interested in? I even think Twitter's still a place there. You can look at trending topics and these kinds of things. So there's still, I'm not a huge fan of Twitter, but I think there's still a place for it, certainly in terms of your planning. So I think then that gives you a good idea of what are people interested in. And then if you can match what's the information that people are looking for with the answers that you can provide, then I think you've got the beginnings of a good strategy, rather than beginning from the question, what are people interested in hearing about, rather than the question, what is it that I want to communicate? I think that's the best way to put together a strategy that's actually going to interest people.
Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly. And that's one of the things I talk about in my workshops is starting with your audience. And the fastest, most effective way to do that is to collect a series of FAQs. So frequently asked questions. And by doing that, that can serve as the fodder for a lot of your content. And you mentioned some very good tools. You mentioned, Keyword Planner and Google Trends. I think it's always best that you're combining both the online channels as well as communicating with your sales, your customer service team, anyone who is interacting with your audiences on a regular basis. They can provide some very rich insights in terms of what are the questions that your audience is having.
Mm. I think that's a great point, actually, Joe. I think there's nothing worse than marketers who sort of sit in their bubble. You know, whether you are an SME or a multinational, you will have colleagues who are customer facing. I think the bigger the company, maybe the less interaction you might have with them. They might be in a different building, a different country, but there will be people in your organization who meet with your customers on a daily basis. Speak to them, you know, find out what are the questions they get asked. If you find out that your sales team or your recruiters, whoever it is, are being asked the same question on a day-to-day basis, there's a content idea, right? You can, you know, you get some content that you know is going to perform and also help make their lives easier. I think one of the things that we often struggle with social is justifying or explaining the ROI. You know, what impact does this have on the bottom line, particularly when you're not in e-commerce. Here's a great example. If you can make recruitment easier or make sales easier, there's your answer to the ROI question.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent point. I think at the end of the day, social media can serve many purposes, whether it's driving, you know, demand for clients or candidates. And I think it feeds in with all the different elements. So I think social media definitely plays a big part. Now, funny enough, B2B social media gets a really bad rap for being considered very boring. I was at a conference recently, and one of the questions they asked was, why is B2B social media so damn boring? So what are your thoughts on that? How can, you know, B2B marketers kind of avoid that and create something more, a little bit more interesting or exciting for their audiences?
Yeah, and look, I think that's a really good question. My answer would be, I don't think there's any such thing as a boring business. I mean, there's businesses that seem, you know, sexier or more glamorous, but all businesses, B2B or B2C, you're about solving a problem. Someone has a problem, you're providing a solution. That's interesting. I think that the challenge is, first of all, making sure you're speaking to the right audience. I mean, if we pick an industry that has a reputation as being dry, and apologies to anyone listening from this industry, but I'm going to pick up accounting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I'm scrolling through my Instagram and I'm, you know, a young person in my 20s, sadly I no longer am, but let's pretend. I'm probably not going to find that very interesting because you're targeting the wrong audience, and arguably you're on the wrong platform as well. If you're doing it in a more targeted way, if you're using, first of all, a more suitable platform, I think LinkedIn is a good example there. If you're making sure that you're targeting the audience, you know, you have a much better chance, I think, of being interesting. And then it kind of goes back to what we were saying a few minutes ago about, you know, how do you come up with the content strategy? I think if you are using content just about how great your product is, that's probably going to be boring. It doesn't matter how cool your product is. If you're shouting about the features and the benefits, that's not that interesting. If you're talking about some of the problems that people face and how this can be a part of the solution, then I think that's more interesting. So I think I hear that a lot, that B2B marketing is boring. I think when it's boring, and sometimes it is, sometimes B2C marketing is boring too. I think let's not put all the blame on B2B. But I think when it is, I think it's a failure in the marketing process rather than the industry being inherently boring.
Yeah, so that's a very good point. Talking about, you know, obviously it should be very relevant to the audience. And I was on a panel recently, and one of the panelists said that boring is really subjective. So for example, he's in the tech space, and one of the most effective kind of lead gen things from social media is like these very long techie white papers. And he was talking to the audience. He's like, that might be very boring for everyone in this audience, but for my audience, they love it. They want to dive into that. They find it very interesting. So I think that's an interesting concept in terms of, you know, boring is very much subjective. You know, you as a layman might find it boring, but someone you're targeting as a business might find it very exciting and very interesting to them. So I think it goes back to what you're saying about really understanding your audience and creating content that appeals to them and not really shouting about your brand.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I mean, I back in my agency days, I used to write a few white papers in a kind of nerdy way. I actually quite enjoyed it. So I'm a bit biased when it comes to white papers in general. But I think you're completely right. I mean, if you know, someone gave me a white paper on, or any piece of content on, IT procurement, I would find it boring because that's not my interest. You give me something on digital marketing, I would probably read it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, another big question I get is people are always wondering which social media channel they should be on, especially from a B2B standpoint. So based on your experience, which social media channels have been most effective for your B2B efforts?
Look, I think LinkedIn almost goes without saying, so I don't think there's much point in dwelling on that. I think as a business, if you're not on LinkedIn already, you really should be. I think the interesting one for us has probably been Instagram. We're investing quite a lot in Instagram. We've got some good followings now for a lot of that, and we actually get great income. We use it very carefully. I mean, I would not talk about our products. I don't think there's much demand on Instagram for information on natural resources, but we use it a lot for employees. So one of our biggest challenges at the moment is that we're going through quite an aggressive expansion phase, and with that comes a lot of recruitment. And inevitably, a lot of the people that we're targeting are kind of mid-20s, maybe a few years experience. That's really the kind of core demographics for Instagram. So we're putting out a lot of content, basically just about what's it like to work with us. So some of that is employee profiles. Some of that is information, on awards or achievements, these kinds of, and just trying to put out a sense of, what is it like to work with the company. The other one that we push there, obviously, is the sustainability side, because we've got some great images of conservation and animals, these kinds of things, which obviously performs very strongly. So that's great for getting likes, but we're actually using it in quite a strategic way, I think, for recruitment. So I think maybe that's an answer that perhaps people might not necessarily expect for B2B, but Instagram's been a real growth for us over the last year or so. So I would honestly advise people to check it out, but forget about product pictures. I mean, I'm pretty confident that will not work for B2B.
Yeah, so I don't think I've heard of many B2B organizations using Instagram for their efforts, but I think it makes perfect sense from what you're saying from a recruitment point of view, especially when you're trying to recruit younger talent, because that's where they're spending more of their time. I love the tips you gave in terms of not making it so much product focused, but making it more kind of what's it like to work within the organization, what's the culture like, so all the different things that could be applicable to someone looking for a job. And once again, you're going after the right audience and the right channel, so I think that makes perfect sense.
One more point I would make on that. We've done a lot over the last year on employee advocacy. So basically encouraging employees to post their own content about what's it like to work with us. Ties in with what I was saying about employer branding. Again, go where the people are. These guys are on Instagram. I think most of them now are not using, for example, Twitter. So to try and push them into posting there regularly, I think you're fighting a losing battle. Everybody's on Instagram all the time, so make life easy. Go where the people are, and that is Instagram currently. So again, I think you need to be very careful what content you're putting out, because it is a very visual channel. But provided you've got those great pictures, then I think you can have some success there. Just be clear on what it is you're trying to achieve. It's maybe not, certainly for us, we're never going to be driving sales there, but there's other objectives that we can achieve there.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point that you raised, Philip, is understanding the objectives for each channel. Because once again, if you're a B2B organization, you may use LinkedIn from a sales point of view for driving sales, demand. But if you're doing recruitment, then your objective for Instagram is more in terms of building that employer brand, the advocacy, recruitment. So really understanding, I think, the objectives can really help you target and focus your efforts a little bit more clearly. Mm-hmm. Now, are there any go-to channels in which you go to often to find out more about kind of B2B social media? Anything where you go for inspiration?
Obviously, Joe, your newsletter, which but I mean, seriously, I do find that and other news quite useful. I think, I mean, if you want something that's not plug up your email inbox, check out Social Baker's Instagram feed. Actually, they do a really good job of just staying up to date with all of the updates and new features from the various social channels, and then collating all of that into their IG stories. So that's a great go-to as well. So there's tons of resources out there.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for the kind words about the newsletter. I really appreciate that. Very kind of you. Now, speaking of employer advocacy, we've had the opportunity to collaborate on our project. So I just want to get your thoughts on kind of what was your experience on that collaboration?
Look, I think it's always important to get outside perspectives. I think for us, a lot of what we're doing, our company's 50 years old. We're fairly big. We're operating in multiple markets. So a lot of what we're doing is digital transformation. It's always great to, as I said, get an outside perspective, but also I think it can be useful to, if you are bringing people in for training, which is what we've collaborated on, it can be useful to bring someone in from outside the organization, just as a way of it's a change of scenery for people. I think it maybe adds a bit more seriousness to the occasion when people understand you've actually invested money as well as time into arranging something. So I think it's useful in general. I think I've given you one sales plug already without shining your shoes too much. I think I'm pleased with our collaboration. Hence the reason I agreed to have this conversation today, and I hope it will continue.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate the feedback. Now, are there any last tips you want to give to any B2B social media marketers listening to the show?
No, I think we've probably covered everything. I mean, is there anything you would like to discuss based on our collaboration so far?
So that's a good question. I think so I recently had a meeting, and one of the big questions was really the employer advocacy part. So there's an organization I was met with recently, it's a tech brand, and they were just starting their kind of employee ambassador program. And I know you guys have already kickstarted that program. That was something we discussed last time. So it'd be good to find out kind of how that has progressed on your end, and what is kind of the impact that you've witnessed from that.
So I think employee advocacy is important for any business. I mean, I think the world is so social. I think your employees are on social media anyway, so you might as well take advantage of that. I also think it adds some credibility. I think there's always, I think with any business, with any official communication, there's always a degree of skepticism. And I think probably more now than ever. People are, there's so much talk about fake news and what have you, that people are questioning the sources. Maybe we don't question things as much as we ought to, hence some of the politics we're seeing at the moment. But there's always that skepticism. People believe, and there's a ton of research that supports this, but people view content posted by other people as being much more credible than they view content that's posted by brands. And so take advantage of your employee. Take advantage is perhaps not the right not the right phrase, but and take advantage of that trend and engage your employee. I think what I've seen both in this business and other companies where I've kind of been involved in things like this, people really appreciate being asked to be involved in these things. I think it's a great way, just in terms of engaging your own employees, in terms of benefiting retention as well. If people feel that they've had an investment made in them, maybe organizing some social media training for them, for example, the results are going to be better, but also they're going to appreciate that investment that you've made in them. So I think, I think if people are not engaging in some form of employee advocacy, I really would recommend that they try it. I think it's worked very well for us. It's worked very well for pretty much everyone else that I've spoken to who's tried it.
So it's a very good point I think you bring up. The obvious one is in terms of recruitment. Now, obviously, a lot of the times, if you're a company page versus an individual, a lot of the times if you're interested in a role, it's generally that spark comes from the individual who's sharing it. It's easier to have that dialogue. So I think that's an excellent point in terms of employee advocacy. But you also talked about retention as well, which is extremely important, especially in this part of the world, and really getting them involved in the process. So by getting them involved, making them feel like they're, part of the team, part of the efforts, then it makes them feel more motivated and less inclined to quit. So I think that is an added benefit that I don't think a lot of organizations think of when they think of employee advocacy.
Yeah, I would agree.
Wonderful. All right, Philip, well, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you sharing all of your insights on B2B social media marketing. Thank you so much for your time. And
it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you so much. And if you're watching, if you enjoyed Philip's interview, please feel free to share it with your colleagues, your boss, anyone who might find it helpful. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time.